The world has taught you to measure your worth by numbers. Every like, every comment, every follower can make you feel validated one moment and invisible the next. You scroll endlessly, hoping for approval, yet a hollow ache lingers inside. What if I told you that this chase has been stealing something far greater than attention? Your soul was never meant to be rated, ranked, or approved by anyone but God. The truth is, your value is eternal, unseen by algorithms, untouched by trends, and it has always been enough. Today, we begin a journey to reclaim your identity, to step away from the illusion, and to discover a freedom that no social metric can ever take away. You don't have to earn love that was given before the foundation of the world. You don't have to perform to be seen, because God sees every part of you that the world cannot. You have been living in a world that teaches you to measure your worth by numbers. Every like, every comment, every follower acts like a mirror, reflecting approval back at you, but it is only a reflection. It is temporary, conditional, and shallow. You post a photo, a thought, or a moment, and you wait. You wait for someone to tell you that you are enough, that you matter, that you exist in a way that is seen and validated. And when the response is less than what you hoped, a quiet emptiness creeps in, a sense that something inside you is missing. This emptiness is not a flaw in you. It is a signal that you have been seeking your identity in the wrong place. You have been letting a screen and its metrics define the essence of who you are. The truth is that these numbers, these reactions, these virtual approvals were never designed to sustain your soul. They were never meant to fill the void that only God can fill. The moment you realize that, the moment you see through the illusion, you start to understand the invisible chains that have been holding you captive. Every notification that brings a surge of excitement also has the power to pull your focus away from eternity, away from the core of your being that God has meticulously created and chosen to love. These chains are subtle. They do not scream at you. They whisper. They make you believe that approval is scarce, that attention is currency, that your value is negotiable. You feel compelled to perform, to craft the perfect post, to edit and curate your life until it fits a standard that was never meant for you. And the paradox is that even when you receive likes and positive comments, the satisfaction is fleeting. It vanishes like smoke, leaving behind the same longing, the same need for affirmation, only now tied to a digital echo rather than the truth of your identity in God. You are not your profile picture. You are not your status update. You are not the applause you receive in the virtual crowd. You are the creation of a divine hand, intricately formed, known fully, and loved completely. God's view of you does not fluctuate based on performance. It does not hinge on trends, popularity, or perception. It is fixed, eternal, and abundant. When you start to anchor your worth in this reality, the need for external validation loses its grip. You begin to experience a freedom that social media has never been able to offer. You begin to live from a place of truth rather than comparison, from a place of love rather than judgment, from a place of faith rather than fleeting applause. Recognize that the pursuit of likes is a pursuit of emptiness. Every hour spent scrolling, waiting for a reaction, is a moment spent disconnected from the presence of God that sustains, nourishes, and affirms you at your deepest level. The more you chase approval online, the more your soul becomes fragmented, split between who you are and who the world tells you to be. But there is a way out, a way to reclaim the life, peace, and identity that were never meant to be dictated by anyone but your Creator. Start by seeing the truth. Likes are not love. Comments are not confidence. Followers are not fulfillment. They are distractions, illusions that demand attention, but give nothing lasting in return. Your real identity cannot be quantified. It cannot be measured. It cannot be approved by any algorithm. It exists in the intimate knowledge that God has of you, in the moments when you feel unseen by everyone else but fully seen by Him. Begin to shift your focus from the fleeting applause of the digital world to the eternal affirmation of your soul's Creator. Every post, every scroll, every reaction becomes secondary to the knowledge that you are enough, exactly as you are. You are more than a number. You are more than a profile. You are not a statistic or a metric to be optimized. You are a being of infinite worth, infinitely known, and infinitely loved. Understanding this is not simply a mental exercise, it is a spiritual awakening. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you rest, and how you live. It liberates you from the constant need for approval and replaces it with a quiet confidence, a lasting peace, and a deep connection to God's truth. The illusion of digital approval will always be tempting because it is loud and seductive, but it is temporary. The approval that lasts is the one that exists beyond the screen, beyond the scroll, beyond the noise. It is invisible, unwavering, and eternal. When you internalize this truth, you begin to reclaim every part of yourself that the digital world tried to define. You begin to stand in your own truth, rooted not in the eyes of others, but in the eyes of God. You begin to experience the profound liberation of living authentically, knowing that your value has never been contingent on anyone else. You are seen, you are known, and you are loved, not by numbers, not by trends, but by the one who crafted you with infinite care and purpose. And that, more than anything else, is the awakening your soul has been waiting for. You have been trained to perform, to show up in ways that are visible, impressive, and consumable. Every post, every story, every carefully edited moment carries a silent expectation. Be noticed, be admired, be validated. The problem is that in the pursuit of attention, you begin to lose the essence of being present with God and with yourself. Presence is quiet. Presence does not demand applause or recognition. Performance, on the other hand, always requires an audience. You start measuring every thought, every action, every moment of your life by how it will appear to others. You plan your days, your conversations, and even your prayers with the subtle question, will this be seen? Will this be liked? The danger is not just in social media. It seeps into your relationships, your work, your spiritual life. You arrive at a church service worried about what others think of your devotion. You pray quietly at home but find yourself imagining someone witnessing your piety. Performance replaces presence when your energy is spent curating an image rather than connecting with reality. You are physically there, but your soul is elsewhere, somewhere chasing impressions, ratings, and fleeting approval. This pattern gradually erodes intimacy with God. It prevents you from hearing His voice because your focus is consumed by the echo of human approval. You forget that God desires presence, not perfection. He longs for honesty, not image. He sees the moments you cannot post, the silent struggles, the unshared victories. He values your time, your heart, your attention far more than any visible achievement. Performance may impress a crowd for a moment, but presence transforms your life from the inside out. It allows you to experience God's love in real time, to see His fingerprints in ordinary moments, and to connect with others authentically. When you are present, you are free from the anxiety of measurement. You can engage with the world without being consumed by its judgment. You can offer your time, your thoughts, your energy without the burden of expectation. Your actions become expressions of love, faith, and integrity, rather than strategic maneuvers to gain approval. The shift from performance to presence is not about doing less. It is about being more, being attentive, being honest, being grounded. It is choosing to participate in life as it is, not as it appears to others. This is where transformation begins. When you are fully present, you recognize that your value is not in what you produce for the world, but in the simple fact that you exist in God's eyes. Your soul rests, your spirit is nourished, your connection to God deepens. Performance will always be tempting because it promises recognition, influence, and significance. But presence offers something far greater: authenticity, peace, and the enduring certainty that you are enough just as you are. When you reclaim presence over performance, you reclaim your life, you reclaim your faith, you reclaim your soul. You begin to live from a place of truth instead of a place of expectation. You start to see the beauty of moments that are unshared, unliked, and unnoticed by anyone but God. And in that space, your identity is restored. You are no longer defined by how well you perform in the eyes of the world. You are defined by how deeply you connect with the one who created you, the one who knows you completely, the one who loves you unconditionally. This is the awakening every heart longs for, the realization that presence is greater than performance, and connection is more important than applause. When you embrace it, your life begins to align with a freedom that no audience, no algorithm, and no number can ever replicate. Comparison is one of the quietest yet most destructive thieves of peace. It doesn't arrive loudly or announce its presence. It creeps in slowly, disguised as curiosity or motivation. You scroll, you look, you measure. You see someone else's success, beauty, family, ministry, or influence, and a small voice inside begins to whisper that you are behind, that you are less, that you are missing something. That whisper does not come from God. It is the subtle erosion of joy disguised as inspiration. You start to forget that God's timeline is not the world's timeline, and His plan for your life was never meant to look like anyone else's. Every time you compare your journey to another, you are questioning the wisdom of the one who designed yours. You are saying, without words, that His plan for you is not enough. And in doing so, you distance yourself from gratitude, from presence, from peace. Comparison blinds you to your own blessings. You can no longer see the beauty of what God has already done because your eyes are fixed on what He is doing for someone else. You begin to envy highlights that you were never meant to replicate. What you don't see behind those highlights are the unseen battles, the silent tears, the insecurities that others hide just as you do. Everyone is fighting something. Everyone has moments they do not share. But when comparison takes root, you build a false reality where others always win and you always fall short. This illusion steals your energy and your focus. You start living reactively, constantly adjusting who you are to compete with what you see. Spiritually, comparison is poison. It drains your faith because it shifts your attention from God's promises to human progress. You start believing that worth is determined by visibility. You start doubting that God can use you where you are, as you are. Yet Scripture reminds us that the parts of the body that seem weaker are indispensable, that the last will be first, and that favor does not follow status. It follows surrender. The cost of comparison is intimacy with God. You cannot hear His voice clearly when you are tuned into everyone else's. You cannot walk confidently in your calling when your eyes are fixed on another path. The moment you compare, you trade contentment for anxiety, purpose for envy, calling for competition. But there is freedom when you return your gaze to God. When you start thanking Him for what He has placed in your hands, no matter how small it seems, you begin to feel the peace that comparison once stole. You begin to rediscover joy in your own story. You remember that the pace of God is perfect and that He wastes nothing, not a season, not a struggle, not a single day of your journey. You do not need to rush to catch up to anyone else. You only need to walk faithfully in the direction He is leading. Comparison is not conquered by ignoring others. It is conquered by remembering who you are. You were never designed to copy. You were designed to reflect. God made you uniquely because He wanted a story that only your life could tell. Every gift, every limitation, every experience has a purpose. When you understand that, comparison loses its grip. You can celebrate others without questioning yourself. You can look at someone else's success and say, God, thank you for blessing them, because you know that His blessings for you are already written. You no longer need to compete for attention or validation. You begin to trust that what He started in you will be completed in His timing. The spiritual cost of comparison is high, but the reward of contentment is higher. Peace returns when gratitude replaces envy. Faith strengthens when focus replaces distraction. Freedom begins when you decide to stop measuring your worth by someone else's calling. You are not behind. You are being prepared. You are not overlooked. You are being refined. You are not late. You are right on time for what God is shaping within you. The world may tell you that your progress is too slow, but heaven never measures speed. It measures surrender. When you stop comparing, you start living. When you stop competing, you start becoming. And in that sacred place of acceptance, the voice of comparison grows silent, and the voice of God grows clear once again. The world has never been so connected, and yet so divided at the same time. Every day, billions of us reach for our phones before we even pray, scroll before we even breathe, and measure our worth by the numbers glowing on a screen. It's subtle, almost invisible at first. That quiet hunger for approval, the little rush of dopamine when someone likes your post or comments with applause emojis. But slowly, without realizing it, the world begins to whisper a new gospel, that your value is found in visibility, that your importance is determined by impressions, that your soul's worth is a reflection of how many others notice you. It's a lie so beautifully packaged that even believers, those who know their identity in Christ, can find themselves trapped in it. And yet, God never designed your soul to be defined by human validation. He didn't breathe His Spirit into you so that you could chase after the applause of strangers. Imagine this, a generation filled with people who know the name of every influencer, but have forgotten who they are in the presence of the one who created them. A generation that wakes up anxious if a post doesn't perform well, and yet feels numb when they realize their prayers have become whispers. That is the silent epidemic of our time. Not a lack of connection, but a lack of identity. Because when you let the algorithm decide who you are, you hand over your spiritual compass to a system designed to profit from your insecurity. Every like becomes a drug, every notification a hit of temporary belonging. But what happens when the likes stop coming? When the spotlight fades? What remains of you when the noise quiets and you're left alone with your thoughts? Are you still whole? Or do you start to crumble because you've built your worth on shifting sand? There's a verse that echoes louder today than ever. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? That's not just about money or fame. It's about your online identity too. The truth is, the world's metrics of worth are counterfeit currency in the kingdom of God. Heaven doesn't count followers, it counts faithfulness. It doesn't measure likes, it measures love. You are not an algorithm. You are anointed. You are not data. You are divine. God's affirmation isn't found in numbers, but in the nail-scarred hands that were stretched for you on the cross. But here's where it gets deeper. The enemy doesn't need to destroy you to defeat you. He only needs to distract you. If he can make you obsessed with curating an image instead of cultivating your character, he's already won half the battle. He'll convince you that relevance is more important than reverence, that performance matters more than presence, and that your platform is your purpose. But your identity is not built on digital applause. It's built on eternal adoption. When you anchor your soul in who God says you are, the noise of the world begins to lose its grip. You realize that the number beside your name doesn't define your impact, your obedience does. So if you've been caught in the cycle of seeking validation from likes, views, or followers, hear this: you are already enough. You don't need to be seen by everyone to be chosen by God. When you walk in His truth, you become unshakable, because your worth isn't fluctuating with the algorithm. It's anchored in eternity. This message isn't about rejecting technology or social media. It's about reclaiming your soul from its grasp. It's about remembering that you were created not to be consumed, but to be connected, not to impress, but to influence with authenticity. In this first chapter, we begin a journey back to the center, the heart of who you are. The call is simple, but powerful. Unplug to remember, pause to reconnect, and breathe in the truth that your worth has already been settled at the cross. You are not defined by likes, you are defined by love. Not the fleeting kind offered by the world, but the everlasting kind spoken by the Creator of the universe, who calls you His own. When performance replaces presence, something sacred begins to fade inside us. We start chasing applause instead of anointing, crafting versions of ourselves that please an audience but leave our souls hungry. We begin to measure our faith, not by how close we walk with God, but by how much engagement our walk seems to generate. The tragedy is subtle, almost invisible at first. It starts as an innocent desire to share light, to spread truth, to inspire. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the motive shifts. What was once an overflow of gratitude becomes a performance to maintain relevance. We no longer wait in silence to hear God's voice. We rush to post something that sounds holy enough to earn digital approval. And yet, God is not impressed by performance. He is moved by presence. He does not scroll through our highlight reels. He searches hearts in the quiet places. When was the last time you sat with Him, not to prepare content, not to find inspiration for a post, but just to be with Him. That's the question that burns when we begin to realize how deeply this culture of constant visibility has affected our intimacy with God. Presence is slow, performance is loud. Presence transforms, performance entertains. One feeds the soul, the other drains it until we no longer recognize the person behind the screen. In a world obsessed with showcasing perfection, we've forgotten the beauty of sincerity. True presence demands that we show up as we are, unfiltered, uncertain, even weak. But weakness terrifies the performer in us because it doesn't fit the curated image we've built, so we hide. We rehearse authenticity instead of living it. We turn our relationship with God into a brand, our faith into a display, and our prayers into content. But the Spirit cannot breathe through masks. The Spirit moves through cracks, through honesty, through the trembling heart that dares to come before God without needing to impress Him. There's a difference between doing something for God and doing something with God. The first can be staged. The second requires surrender. When we live in performance mode, we forget that God is not looking for actors. He's looking for sons and daughters who carry His presence into the world, not their persona. The danger of constant performance is that it makes us look spiritual while slowly disconnecting us from the very source of that spirituality. We may speak His name, but our hearts grow distant. We may preach grace, but feel empty of it ourselves. We may inspire others yet silently burn out because we've replaced communion with production. To restore presence, we must dare to stop performing. That doesn't mean quitting everything, but it means shifting the center of gravity from look at me to look at Him. The secret place must become sacred again, not because it produces content, but because it produces life. Every revival begins not on a stage, but on the floor of surrender, where no one is watching but God. When presence returns, peace returns. When peace returns, our words regain power, not from technique or timing, but from truth that has been lived, not rehearsed. You were never called to perform God's love. You were called to dwell in it. The world doesn't need more polished believers. It needs people whose intimacy with God radiates through their imperfections. Presence cannot be faked. You can fake style, charisma, eloquence, but not the fragrance of someone who has been with God. That fragrance draws hearts more deeply than any viral post ever could. Because when performance ends, authenticity begins. And where authenticity begins, God moves. So maybe the next time you feel pressured to prove your worth through what you show, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, am I performing for people or resting in the presence of the one who already approves of me? In that stillness, you'll feel something shift. The need to impress fades. The desire to be seen dissolves. And in that holy silence, you'll rediscover the only applause that matters. The whisper of God saying, I'm with you. That's enough. Aussi, comparison is one of the most subtle thieves of the soul. It doesn't scream or announce its arrival. It creeps quietly, wrapping itself around your thoughts until joy starts to feel like something you have to earn. You scroll, you see someone's highlight, their perfect lighting, their success, their peace, and without realizing it, you start to measure your life by the shape of theirs. It's a slow corrosion, not of faith, but of gratitude. You no longer thank God for what you have. You question why you don't have what someone else does. And the dangerous part is that it feels so normal, so justified, that you forget how spiritually toxic it truly is. The comparison trap isn't just emotional, it's spiritual warfare disguised as self-reflection. It whispers that you're not enough, that God must love others more, that you're somehow behind. But the truth is, comparison blinds you to the unique fingerprints of God over your own journey. You start doubting divine timing because someone else seems to be ahead of schedule. You start resenting your process because someone else's progress looks easier. And every time you do, a small fracture forms in your faith. Not because God changed, but because you stopped seeing your story through His eyes. The enemy doesn't need to destroy your calling. He just needs to distract you from it. And comparison is the perfect tool. It replaces purpose with performance and identity with insecurity. You begin to curate your image instead of cultivating your character. You start posting not to express gratitude, but to prove worth. You start praying not from love, but from envy masked as ambition. The moment you start looking sideways instead of upward, peace begins to leave the room. You may still smile, still serve, still speak of God, but deep inside there's a quiet storm of dissatisfaction that refuses to let you rest. But here's what comparison never tells you. It doesn't just make you jealous of others, it also makes you blind to how deeply blessed you already are. It turns life into a scoreboard and God into a judge of performance. But God never called you to compete, He called you to complete. You are not meant to mirror anyone else's reflection. You were designed to reveal a piece of God that only you can show. When you try to replicate someone else's path, you silence the voice of the Spirit that is guiding your own. The truth is, no one is ahead or behind in the kingdom of God. There are no rankings in grace, no trophies in surrender. There is only obedience, timing, and trust. The moment you let go of comparison, you begin to see again. You start noticing the miracles hidden in your ordinary days. You start celebrating the growth that happens in silence. You start realizing that your worth was never tied to visibility, but to identity. God is not impressed by numbers, He is moved by surrender. And every time you choose gratitude over comparison, heaven notices. Every time you celebrate another person's victory as if it were your own, something inside you expands. That's spiritual maturity being built where insecurity once lived. So what if you started measuring your life not by likes, not by milestones, but by peace? What if success was no longer defined by visibility, but by intimacy with God? That's where real fulfillment begins. Because joy is not found in having more, it's found in needing less. And when your heart is free from comparison, you finally have space to love people instead of competing with them. You become light in a world of constant noise because you no longer crave what others have. You're too busy enjoying what God already gave you. Maybe today is the day you stop scrolling through other people's blessings long enough to recognize your own. You don't need to be anyone else's version of good. You are God's original design. Your story is unfolding exactly as it should, not 1 second late. Stop trying to catch up to others and start catching up to who God called you to be. The moment you do, you'll feel the weight lift, the noise quiet, and the peace return. Because comparison might be loud, but God's truth is louder. You are enough, right here, right now, as you are. There are moments in life that define us long before anyone else notices them. Sacred, hidden moments where heaven sees what the world never will. But we live in an age where almost nothing feels real unless it's seen, where even our most intimate victories are tempted to become performances. You receive a revelation from God, a breakthrough after a long battle, and before the gratitude has even settled in your heart, the instinct rises. Share it, post it, let them know. And without realizing it, we trade the intimacy of the moment for the currency of reaction. We confuse exposure with expression, forgetting that some of the most powerful transformations are meant to stay between us and God. Public reaction can never define what God is doing in private. Yet we've grown addicted to validation loops, that quick rush of digital applause that fades as fast as it appears. But defining moments with God don't operate on applause, they operate on alignment. Sometimes God blesses you in silence because He knows if He made it visible too soon, you'd mistake public approval for divine affirmation. Not every seed He plants is meant to be shared before it's rooted. Some seasons require quiet obedience, unseen growth, and the humility to let God write your story without needing an audience to approve every chapter. There's a tension between wanting to testify and wanting to be admired. And often, they look identical from the outside. You can post the same words. One version glorifies God, the other subtly glorifies yourself. The difference isn't in the language, it's in the motive. Only you and God know whether your heart is expressing gratitude or seeking recognition. This is where many lose their spiritual compass, not because they stopped believing, but because they started performing belief for others instead of living it before God. A defining moment can lose its sacredness the instant we let it be shaped by public perception. Remember the stories in Scripture that never made it to the crowd. The quiet conversations between Jesus and individuals no one else saw. Those were the moments that shaped eternity, not the ones followed by applause. Jesus healed people and often told them, "Tell no one." He wasn't trying to hide miracles. He was protecting the purity of the encounter. Some of the most profound moves of God are fragile when they're fresh. They need protection, not publicity. When you learn to guard your defining moments instead of broadcasting them, your spiritual depth multiplies. You begin to experience faith not as content, but as communion. And yet, we've become a generation that feels invisible without an audience. We've traded witness for visibility, as if being unseen means being unimportant. But God does his best work in hidden places, in the cave, in the wilderness, in the quiet corners of our hearts where no one's watching. Defining moments aren't meant to be trending, they're meant to be transforming. What the world applauds may not be what heaven values. Public reaction might feed your ego, but it rarely feeds your soul. The danger is that if you start depending on reaction to validate revelation, you'll begin to filter God's voice through people's opinions, adjusting your obedience based on what gets the most likes. The cure is to fall back in love with the secret place, to choose depth over display, to live in such a way that you no longer need to announce every victory because you're too busy living in the presence of the one who gave it. When you stop performing your faith and start protecting it, your defining moments regain their weight. They become sacred again, real again, transformative again. And that's where your power begins to return. Not in being known, but in being rooted. Because public reactions fade, algorithms change, audiences move on. But what God builds in you when no one is watching will outlast every trend and every title. Maybe that's what he's been doing all along, hiding you not to punish you, but to prepare you. Protecting the seed of your purpose from the noise of reaction. So when the world finally sees what he's been building in silence, it won't be performance. It will be presence refined by fire. That's the kind of moment that doesn't need to be posted. It just needs to be lived. There's a silent war happening every day, not between nations or ideologies, but between your soul and your screen. One promises connection, the other offers communion. One feeds your mind with noise, the other restores your heart with stillness. And though both call for your attention, only one can give you peace. Every scroll, every click, every notification is a subtle tug, pulling you further from the still waters God designed for your rest. The screen demands constant movement, constant reaction. The soul, however, was never built for this kind of pace. It was designed for depth, for reflection, for the slow and steady rhythm of grace. The more we stare into the glow of our screens, the harder it becomes to see the light within us. We tell ourselves it's harmless, just a few minutes, just a quick check. But hours pass, and something sacred dulls inside. The screen rewards us with momentary stimulation, but leaves behind a residue of emptiness, a quiet exhaustion that seeps into the soul. The truth is, we're not just losing time, we're losing touch. With God, with ourselves, with the world right in front of us. We've traded wonder for convenience, contemplation for consumption, and in the process, we've allowed pixels to define what presence once did. But the soul doesn't thrive in constant exposure. It flourishes in stillness, it grows in silence, and it recognizes God not through notifications, but through nudges, soft, unseen, easy to miss if the noise is too loud. There's a difference between being informed and being transformed. The screen can inform you about God, but only stillness allows you to be transformed by Him. You can't stream intimacy. You can't download peace. You can't binge your way to spiritual depth. These things require space, sacred space, where the noise of the world dies down enough for heaven's whisper to be heard again. This isn't about demonizing technology. It's about discerning who's leading your attention. The screen is not evil, but it's powerful. It shapes desires, rewires focus, and molds the mind's sense of value. Every platform is designed to keep you watching, not worshiping, consuming, not contemplating. The danger is not in using it. It's in forgetting who you are when it starts using you. When your first thought in the morning is the glow of a screen instead of the presence of God, something deep within begins to shift. The center of gravity moves from eternity to immediacy, from devotion to distraction, and the soul slowly forgets how to be still. Reclaiming your soul from the screen is not about retreating from the world. It's about returning to yourself. It's about remembering that your worth was established long before you ever posted a thing. It's about pausing long enough to let your heart breathe again. God does not compete for your attention. He waits for your surrender. And every time you choose stillness over scrolling, silence over stimulation, you create space for that surrender to happen. You begin to see life again in high definition, not through pixels, but through presence. The laughter of a friend, the quiet of the morning, the voice of the Spirit reminding you that peace isn't found in the next update, but in the ancient truth that you are already loved, already chosen, already seen. The soul and the screen are not equals. One serves eternity, the other serves attention. One invites you to be, the other pressures you to perform. And every day you decide which one wins. You don't have to abandon your devices to restore your soul. You just have to reclaim mastery over them. Use the screen as a tool, not a throne. Let it amplify truth, not replace it. Let it connect you with purpose, not distract you from presence. The goal is not digital silence, but spiritual clarity. The ability to scroll without losing sight of your soul. Maybe it's time to take back what you've been giving away. The moments lost to endless distraction. The peace drained by comparison. The joy stolen by noise. The screen might capture your eyes, but only God can capture your heart. And when your heart returns to Him, the glow of the world starts to dim. The soul remembers its rhythm. The noise fades. The light within burns brighter than the light of any screen. That's when you realize you were never designed to live online. You were designed to live alive. There's a quiet but dangerous shift happening in the human heart. The way we see ourselves is being shaped by algorithms that were never meant to define a soul. The more time we spend online, the more we start to live inside invisible systems that decide what deserves attention, what's valuable, what's relevant. And slowly, without realizing it, we begin to crave that same structure for our own identity. We want to fit into patterns, trends, and formats because that's what seems to work. But the more we do, the more we lose the raw, unpredictable, divine texture of being human. We start to forget that identity was never meant to be optimized. It was meant to be discovered through relationship with the one who created us. An algorithm rewards what's consistent, predictable, and repeatable. But God moves in ways that are wild, mysterious, and deeply personal. The two cannot coexist peacefully. You can't serve both the algorithm and authenticity. The algorithm says, do more of what gets attention. God says, do more of what builds character. The algorithm teaches you to post what works. God teaches you to live what's true. When we let digital systems dictate our sense of value, we're no longer living in truth. We're performing inside a code that doesn't recognize the sacred. It knows your behavior, but it will never know your heart. This is why so many feel lost even when they seem successful. They've mastered visibility but lost identity. They've learned how to capture attention but not how to keep peace. Because when your self-worth is tied to performance metrics, you're always one bad post away from questioning your purpose. The algorithm gives and takes away, but only God gives worth that can't be erased by fluctuation. You were not made to chase metrics. You were made to move mountains. And no algorithm, no trend, no online validation can measure the magnitude of what God has placed inside you. Breaking free from algorithmic identity begins with remembering that your value doesn't need to be updated. It's eternal. The algorithm studies your habits. God studies your heart. The algorithm changes its rules. God's truth never changes. You don't need to adapt your soul to fit digital rhythms. You need to anchor it in divine reality. Because the moment you stop performing for visibility, you begin to live for purpose. That's when your content, your presence, your words, your life begins to carry weight that no algorithm can predict or suppress. Authenticity breaks systems because it doesn't play by their rules. It flows from the spirit, not from strategy. This is not a call to abandon technology. It's a call to reclaim authority over it. Use it as a vessel, not a mirror. Let it serve your mission, not shape your identity. You can be online and still be grounded. You can engage the world and still stay rooted in God's voice. But to do that, you must silence the constant question the algorithm whispers, am I enough? That question is the trap. Because once you answer it through numbers, you've already lost the truth. You were enough before anyone ever clicked, followed, or liked. You were loved before your name was ever known. What if your life stopped chasing optimization and started pursuing obedience? What if your next growth strategy wasn't about reach, but about revelation? The truth is, your calling can't be calculated by analytics. It's written in eternity, and eternity doesn't trend. Every time you choose truth over popularity, you rebel against a system that profits from your insecurity. Every time you rest instead of striving, you remind the world that you're not a product. You're a person, designed for presence, not performance. Maybe it's time to unplug from the metrics that measure your worth and reconnect with the voice that formed your soul. Because when you live by divine rhythm, you become unpredictable to algorithms. Your peace confuses them. Your joy doesn't fit their formula. And your authenticity becomes a kind of digital rebellion, a quiet revolution that reminds others they, too, are more than data. That's how you break free. Not by deleting your account, but by remembering that your true identity has never been up for algorithmic review. In a world that constantly whispers, "You are what they think of you," the soul begins to lose its voice. The chase for validation has never been louder, and yet, the silence within us has never felt so heavy. Every like, every comment, every fleeting digital applause becomes another measure of our worth, another scale on which we weigh our existence. But what happens when the applause fades? When the screen goes dark and there's no one left watching? In that moment, the truth of who you are either stands firm in God or collapses under the weight of human approval. This is not just about social media. It's about the subtle shift that has turned identity into performance and purpose into a product. It's about how we've traded the eternal voice of God for the temporary noise of men. The danger isn't in being seen. It's in forgetting who you are when no one is watching. Imagine for a moment that your soul is like a mirror, created to reflect the light of its maker. But over time, fingerprints of opinions, expectations, and comparisons smudge its surface. You start to see a distorted reflection, one molded by metrics instead of meaning. And this distortion doesn't happen overnight. It creeps in quietly. A post here, a reaction there, until your confidence starts depending on numbers instead of truth. You begin to shape your voice to fit what pleases the crowd, not what pleases God. Slowly, your authenticity fades behind filters of approval, and your spirit begins to echo with the hollow sound of, "Am I enough?" Yet God never intended your worth to be something that fluctuates with algorithms. Your value was sealed before your first post, before your first follower, before you ever learned to crave recognition. The creator of the universe looked at you and saw something so complete, so intentional, that he called it good. But in the chaos of likes and shares, that voice gets drowned out by the chorus of comparisons. You start believing that your purpose must be proven, that your light only matters if it's visible to others. But true light doesn't need validation to shine. The sun doesn't ask the earth to applaud when it rises. It simply fulfills its purpose because that's what it was made to do. And so were you. There's a hidden beauty in being unseen, a sacred strength in silence where your faith isn't measured by reactions, but by your relationship with God. That's where identity is rebuilt. It's not in performing, but in resting, in remembering that before the world knew your name, heaven already celebrated it. When you return to that place, when you root your identity not in the shifting sands of approval, but in the unshakable rock of God's truth, something powerful happens. You stop chasing mirrors that reflect what's popular and start reflecting the one who made you. You rediscover that joy isn't found in being noticed, but in being known. So this journey begins here, with an awakening. A call to step out of the endless scroll and look up, to stop measuring your worth by what fades and start anchoring it in what lasts forever. The world will always sell you a version of yourself that depends on attention, but God offers you an identity that cannot be canceled, shadow banned, or forgotten. The first step in keeping your soul untangled from the web of validation is remembering that your identity isn't something you build. It's something you already have. You were designed with divine fingerprints, created with a purpose that algorithms can't quantify. Every moment you spend chasing approval, is a moment you drift from that truth. It's time to return, to silence the noise, to remember your reflection, to let the light of your Creator wash away the dust of opinions. Because when your heart stops performing and starts abiding, you'll find something that no number can give you. Peace. Not the peace of being accepted, but the peace of knowing you were never lost. And from that place the journey truly begins, learning not to let likes define your soul, but to let love, divine and unchanging, define your life. There comes a moment when you realize that the pursuit of validation has quietly rewritten your soul's priorities. It doesn't happen with one post, one like, or one comment. It's a slow drift. You start by sharing something genuine, something born from truth, but soon you notice what gets attention and what doesn't. Without even meaning to, you adjust. You start to tailor your words, your expressions, your very essence to what the world rewards. And slowly, the real you starts to fade into the background. The tragedy isn't that people don't see you, it's that you stop seeing yourself. Your worth begins to feel like a currency, fluctuating with every wave of attention. You begin to crave the next moment of validation like a lifeline, mistaking it for love. But deep down, there's still a whisper. The quiet echo of the person you were before the noise began. The person who didn't need an audience to feel significant, who found peace in purpose, not performance. That whisper is God calling you back to truth. Because no matter how far the world pulls you, His voice still waits, unchanging, steady, and real. He doesn't measure your value by engagement rates or trends. To Him, your worth isn't a number, it's a name, written on His hands. And that truth doesn't just heal, it liberates. The more you lean into it, the more you start to feel the weight of the performance fall away. You begin to realize that the love you've been searching for was never in the world's eyes. It was in His gaze all along. When you finally step out of the cycle of validation, the silence might feel uncomfortable at first. You've grown so used to the noise that peace feels foreign. But this silence isn't emptiness. It's space for your soul to breathe again. It's in that stillness that you rediscover what you were made for. You see, the enemy's greatest trick isn't convincing you that God doesn't exist. It's convincing you that His love isn't enough, that you need to prove yourself, impress others, build an image worthy of applause. But God's truth dismantles that lie completely. His love is not earned, it's eternal. And the moment you stop chasing recognition, you start living from revelation. You stop performing for approval and start walking in identity. You were not made to be consumed. You were made to create, to reflect, to love, to live in freedom. The world wants your attention, but God wants your affection. And when you give it to Him, you'll notice how everything starts to shift. The things that used to feel urgent, checking reactions, comparing numbers, curating perfection, lose their grip. You begin to see how fragile the world's approval really is, because it celebrates today and forgets tomorrow. But the love of God doesn't fade. It anchors you. It grounds you in truth so deeply that no opinion can uproot you. That's the beauty of identity in Him. It doesn't depend on who's watching, only on who's within you. So, when you feel the pull to post for validation, pause. When you feel that sting of being unseen, breathe. Remember that your purpose isn't tied to visibility but to eternity. You don't need to be noticed to make a difference. You just need to be aligned with God. Because the greatest impact often comes from those who quietly walk with integrity while the world shouts for attention. That's where your strength lies, not in being admired, but in being authentic, not in performing for applause, but in reflecting divine love in everything you do. You are not a brand to manage. You are a soul to nurture. You don't need likes to be loved or followers to have influence. Your life already speaks volumes when it mirrors God's heart. So stop chasing what fades and return to what fulfills. The world may measure success by reach, but heaven measures it by roots. And when your roots are deep in God, no storm can shake who you are. This is where freedom begins, not in being seen, but in being secure. Not in proving yourself, but in remembering that you were already chosen, already enough, already loved. There is a type of approval that the world will never see, a validation that cannot be measured by likes, comments, or shares. It is invisible to the human eye, yet it has the power to shape every decision, every thought, and every action. This is God's approval, and it is the only approval that truly matters. While society teaches you to crave recognition, God whispers that your worth is already sealed, complete, and eternal. Unlike digital applause, which is fleeting and conditional, divine affirmation exists beyond time, beyond trend, and beyond fluctuation. It is not given for performance, it is given for presence. And when you anchor yourself in it, the soul begins to breathe again. The world will celebrate moments that are flashy, loud, or viral. God celebrates hearts that are surrendered, hands that serve, and spirits that remain faithful even when no one is watching. Invisible approval isn't something earned in the spotlight. It is cultivated in the quiet obedience of daily life. When you pray in your room, give without recognition, or endure trials without showing off, you are not unnoticed. You are approved. This approval is a quiet fire that strengthens your spirit, fuels perseverance, and builds a confidence that cannot be shaken by public opinion. It is the approval that matters when everyone else stops applauding, when algorithms shift, and when attention moves on. The power of invisible approval lies in its permanence. Unlike human validation, it cannot be stolen, revoked, or diminished by circumstance. You do not need to perform to earn it, manipulate to sustain it, or curate to maintain it. It is freely given by a God who knows every thought, every struggle, and every hidden act of faith. When you begin to live for this approval, your priorities shift. You no longer chase applause from the crowd because the recognition you truly need has already been granted. Your energy is no longer wasted on proving yourself, but invested in becoming the person God created you to be. Many struggle because they mistake visibility for value. They post, compare, and measure their lives by reactions rather than by obedience. But God's approval is not about perception, it is about reality. The spirit sees what is unseen, the heart feels what is unspoken, and eternity recognizes what the world overlooks. You may be ignored, criticized, or misunderstood by society, but none of that changes your value in God's eyes. In fact, the less the world sees, the more room there is for God's approval to anchor you. It frees you to act from purpose rather than panic, to speak from truth rather than trend, to love from fullness rather than fear. Invisible approval also cultivates resilience. When the world applauds, it is easy to feel confident. But when the world is silent or worse, critical, true identity can only survive if it is rooted in what is unseen. God's approval does not waver with public opinion. It does not fluctuate with circumstance. It remains steady when storms arise, when doors close, and when achievements are overlooked. Living for this type of approval transforms your mindset. You stop measuring success by recognition and start measuring it by faithfulness. You stop seeking influence and start embracing integrity. You stop performing and start abiding. This kind of approval changes how you interact with the world. Actions are no longer motivated by fear of judgment or desire for praise. They flow naturally from love, obedience, and purpose. Decisions are no longer anxious attempts to impress. They become deliberate steps in alignment with God's plan. Your life becomes a testimony not because it is witnessed, but because it is faithful. And paradoxically, this invisible approval often produces the most visible impact. When you walk confidently in what God affirms, others notice, not because you sought it, but because authenticity cannot be hidden. The challenge today is simple but profound. Choose God's approval over the world's applause. Embrace the truth that what God says about you matters infinitely more than what anyone else thinks. Stop measuring your value by what can be seen, and start living for what is eternal. The more you rely on invisible affirmation, the freer your soul becomes. Peace replaces anxiety. Confidence replaces fear. Purpose replaces pressure. And in that freedom, you discover a life of depth, joy, and power that no algorithm or audience can ever replicate. Authenticity is a rare treasure in a world that constantly rewards imitation. It is a quiet rebellion against the pressure to perform, to compare, to mold yourself into something that looks appealing but feels hollow. When we live for likes, comments, or approval, we sacrifice the very thing that gives life meaning, the freedom to be who we truly are. True joy does not come from recognition. It comes from alignment. It comes from living in a way that reflects the essence of your soul, the person God created you to be, without masks, without pretension, without filters. Reclaiming joy and authenticity begins with courage. It requires you to face the truth about who you are, with all your flaws and strengths, and to accept that God's love does not depend on your performance. Many of us hide behind personas crafted for safety or popularity, believing that if the world sees the real us, we might be rejected. But the reality is, you will never find genuine joy in being accepted by a world that does not know your heart. Joy is found in surrender, in the unshakable confidence that God sees you fully, understands your struggles, and still calls you beloved. The process of reclaiming authenticity also involves letting go of the need to control perception. When we obsess over how others see us, we lose the ability to see ourselves clearly. We start to measure our worth against standards that are external, superficial, and fleeting. We shape our actions to please the wrong audience, chasing an applause that can vanish in an instant. Authenticity, by contrast, is unshakable because it is rooted in truth, not approval. When you live authentically, you no longer bend to the whims of social validation. You move according to the rhythm of God's purpose. There is also a deep healing that comes when we stop hiding and start revealing our true selves. Vulnerability becomes a strength, not a weakness. You discover that your imperfections do not disqualify you from love or from purpose. They make you relatable, human, and profoundly impactful. People are drawn not to perfection, but to honesty, courage, and integrity. And God uses that authenticity to amplify your influence in ways that no calculated strategy ever could. Every time you choose to show your true self, you create space for others to do the same. Joy becomes contagious, not because it is displayed, but because it is genuine. Authenticity restores freedom. It frees you from the invisible chains of comparison, from the relentless pursuit of validation, from the exhaustion of performing who you think others want you to be. It allows your spirit to breathe. It allows your actions to flow naturally, not forced by expectation but guided by conviction. And as joy returns, it becomes a compass, showing you the path of purpose. You realize that fulfillment is not found in applause, trends, or visibility. It is found in living fully as the person God made you to be. The more you embrace authenticity, the more your life aligns with divine intention. Decisions become clearer, relationships become richer, and every moment is infused with meaning because it flows from truth. You stop investing energy into pleasing the wrong crowd and start investing in the life that matters most, the one God has designed specifically for you. Authenticity is not just a way of living. It is a spiritual act of worship. By being real, you honor the God who made you in His image, giving back to Him what was never meant to be hidden or altered. In reclaiming joy through authenticity, you also reclaim your soul. You stop surrendering pieces of yourself to the world's expectations. You begin to experience peace that cannot be disrupted by shifting trends or fleeting approval. Happiness becomes deep, rooted, and lasting. And in that place, you finally see the beauty of living without pretense. Your life becomes a reflection of divine truth, and your joy becomes an unspoken testimony. The world may continue to demand performance, but your soul no longer answers to it. You have returned to the essence of who you are, and in that return you find the liberation, the peace, and the joy that was waiting for you all along. Identity anchored in external measures is fragile. When your sense of self is built on approval, comparisons, or fleeting accomplishments, it can be shaken by a single comment, a single rejection, a single day when the world seems silent. But when identity is anchored in eternal truth, it becomes unmovable. You begin to understand that who you are is not defined by what people see, what algorithms measure, or what trends dictate. Your worth is defined by God, established before time, and sealed by His love. This truth does not shift with circumstance. It remains steadfast even in the storms of life. Anchoring your identity in God begins with awareness. You must first see the illusions that have been shaping your sense of self. You must recognize when your heart is seeking approval instead of affirmation, when your joy is dependent on applause instead of assurance, when your decisions are influenced by popularity rather than purpose. These are subtle traps, but once you name them, you can choose differently. You can stop allowing external metrics to dictate your value and start rooting yourself in the unchanging character of God, whose perception of you is perfect, complete, and unwavering. The foundation of eternal truth is understanding that you are made in the image of God. You are created with intention, crafted with a unique purpose, and equipped with gifts that no one else can replicate. When you internalize this reality, you no longer need constant validation from the world. Every compliment, every like, every fleeting recognition becomes optional, not essential. You begin to walk with a quiet confidence that is immune to criticism, untouched by comparison, and unshaken by the opinions of others. Your identity becomes a reflection of divine design, not human judgment. Anchoring yourself in eternal truth also transforms how you handle challenges. When circumstances seem to define you, failures, setbacks, misunderstandings, you can rise above them because your identity is not in what happened, but in who God says you are. You start to respond from stability, not insecurity. Decisions are guided by clarity, not fear. Your emotions are balanced because your foundation is deeper than external pressures. And in this place of rootedness, freedom emerges. Freedom from the need to perform. Freedom from the fear of being unseen. Freedom from the anxiety that comes from measuring your worth against a moving target. Spiritual disciplines help solidify this anchor. Prayer, reflection, meditation on Scripture, and intentional silence allow you to hear God's voice above the noise of the world. These practices remind you daily that your life is not defined by trends, but by eternal promises. When you speak truth over yourself, even in moments of doubt, you reinforce the foundation of your identity. You stop relying on what others see and start trusting what God knows. Over time, this transforms not just how you feel about yourself, but how you live in the world. Anchoring your identity in eternal truth is not passive. It requires daily commitment. It is a conscious choice to align your thoughts, words, and actions with God's perspective rather than the fleeting opinions of people. It is choosing the eternal over the temporary, the authentic over the performative, the invisible approval of heaven over the visible applause of the world. And as you do this, a profound peace takes root. You no longer drift with the currents of comparison, envy, or validation. You stand firm in your divine purpose, confident that no one can redefine what God has already established. When you finally embrace this truth, life shifts. Your relationships become healthier because they are based on reality, not performance. Your work becomes more meaningful because it flows from identity, not insecurity. Your spirit becomes lighter because it is unburdened from seeking approval that was never meant to measure your value. Anchoring your identity in eternal truth is more than a mindset. It is a transformation of the soul. It is the place where freedom, peace, and joy converge, and where you finally live as the person God created you to be, fully, unshakably, eternally. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness, a void to be feared, avoided, or filled with noise. But silence is not absence. It is a presence waiting to be discovered. It is the space where God speaks most clearly, the environment where the soul remembers who it is and what it was created to do. In the rush of constant notifications, endless feeds, and relentless comparison, we rarely give ourselves permission to step into quiet. Yet without it, clarity is impossible. The mind remains cluttered, the heart restless, and the spirit distracted by the illusions of significance the world constructs. Silence, when embraced, transforms perception. It shifts the focus from what is urgent to what is eternal. In silence, the noise of public opinion begins to fade, and the voice of God emerges with precision. It is in these moments that we see our true desires, motivations, and fears. We confront the parts of ourselves that were hidden beneath the weight of performance and approval. The questions we avoid in the clamor of life surface. Who am I without the audience? What do I truly believe? What am I living for when no one is watching? These are not easy questions, but they are essential for a life anchored in truth. Silence does not comfort the shallow identity. It challenges it. It exposes what is built on perception and illuminates what is built on purpose. Transforming silence into spiritual clarity also means learning to listen without distraction. The world tempts us to seek answers in the visible: trends, comparisons, advice, social affirmation, rather than in the unseen source of truth. But clarity comes not from consultation with the world, but from communion with God. When you learn to sit in stillness, to resist the pull of constant input, and to let your heart focus on His presence, insight emerges organically. The direction of your life, the understanding of your purpose, and the discernment of your next steps all become clearer. Silence is not passive. It is active engagement with eternity. There is also a refining power in silence. Just as gold is purified by fire, the soul is refined by stillness. The distractions that once dictated behavior lose their grip. The incessant craving for approval diminishes. The internal dialogue of comparison quiets, making room for the voice that matters most. And in this clarity, decisions become less reactive and more intentional. Actions align with values. Words carry weight. Presence becomes meaningful. The life that emerges is no longer shaped by the fleeting attention of others, but by the enduring truth of God's design. The process of finding clarity in silence requires courage and discipline. It may feel uncomfortable at first because the habit of constant stimulation has rewired attention, but discomfort is often the gateway to transformation. Each moment spent in intentional stillness strengthens the soul's ability to discern truth from illusion, purpose from performance. Prayer, meditation, reflection, and even long walks alone without distraction can all be gateways to this clarity. The world may label it as unproductive, but God labels it as essential. The silence is where strategy meets spirit, where contemplation meets action, and where identity is solidified beyond human metrics. When you embrace silence, you discover that being unseen does not equate to being unimportant. You realize that your identity does not require an audience, and that your soul thrives not in performance but in presence. Clarity transforms not only how you see yourself, but also how you engage with the world. You act with intention, speak with honesty, and respond with wisdom. The distractions that once consumed energy are replaced with focus that multiplies effectiveness. The noise of comparison gives way to a rhythm of divine alignment, and the soul begins to operate with the confidence of one grounded in eternity. Silence is not empty, it is fertile. It is the place where insight, peace, and spiritual authority are cultivated. When the world demands constant visibility, stepping into silence may feel like risk, but it is in that risk that revelation lives. The soul learns to trust what it cannot see but knows is true. And from that place of spiritual clarity, life begins to flow differently. You no longer act to be noticed, you act to obey. You no longer speak to be heard, you speak to reflect truth. You no longer live to impress, you live to align with God. Silence is the secret that transforms fleeting attention into lasting impact, noise into wisdom, and distraction into discernment. Type 1 to write the next topic or type the changes you want. Living beyond the metrics means refusing to let numbers, likes, shares, or opinions dictate the rhythm of your life. Society has conditioned us to measure success in quantifiable ways, to believe that visibility equals value, and to chase recognition as if it were oxygen. But this pursuit is exhausting, unfulfilling, and often deceptive. Metrics can fluctuate, trends fade, and public attention shifts in an instant. When your sense of self is anchored to these fleeting markers, you become fragile, reactive, and dependent. Living beyond them means anchoring your identity, your decisions, and your joy in what is unchanging, God's truth. To live beyond the metrics, you must first acknowledge how deeply they influence your thoughts and actions. You must recognize the subtle ways comparison, validation-seeking, and performance pressure infiltrate daily life. Perhaps you post to impress, speak to be liked, or act to gain approval. Perhaps you measure your happiness by how others respond or track your value by external affirmation. These behaviors are not inherently wrong, but they become dangerous when they replace God's perspective as the foundation of your life. Metrics can inform, guide, and motivate, but they cannot define your worth. Freedom begins when you shift from a life measured by attention to a life measured by purpose. Your worth does not increase with followers nor decrease with silence. It remains constant because God has declared it so. The challenge is to internalize this truth and to let it shape every aspect of your life. Actions are no longer performed to impress. Words are no longer spoken to persuade. Even achievements are no longer flaunted to confirm identity. Instead, every choice is guided by the principle that God sees, God knows, and God values you beyond what anyone else can measure. This shift is radical because it removes the need for constant external validation and replaces it with a peace that metrics can never provide. Living beyond the metrics also requires courage. It means making decisions that may not be popular, embracing actions that go unnoticed, and holding convictions that cannot be quantified. The world may not applaud, algorithms may not recognize, and social platforms may remain silent. But your alignment with God gives meaning that transcends visibility. You learn to invest energy in what truly matters, relationships built on authenticity, work fueled by purpose, and a life oriented around obedience rather than approval. When metrics no longer dictate your mood, your direction, or your value, you experience liberation. This approach transforms how you interact with both people and platforms. You engage online without letting the numbers control your sense of self. You pursue goals not for recognition but for impact. You measure success not by comparison but by faithfulness. Living beyond the metrics allows you to remain stable amidst fluctuations, patient amidst delays, and joyful amidst silence. Your heart is no longer swayed by applause or criticism because it is grounded in the eternal affirmation of God. You operate from a place of confidence that cannot be shaken because it does not depend on temporary attention. Living beyond the metrics also restores balance. You no longer equate busyness with significance or visibility with purpose. You have time to reflect, to rest, and to invest in what truly nurtures your soul. You find joy in acts of service that may go unseen, in prayers that may remain unheard by others, and in moments of quiet obedience that no one documents. The liberation comes not from rejecting the world entirely, but from refusing to let it define you. Metrics are tools, not masters. Numbers are signals, not judges. And attention is fleeting, but God's affirmation is eternal. Ultimately, living beyond the metrics is a spiritual act of resistance. It is a declaration that your soul is not for sale, your value is not negotiable, and your life is not dictated by algorithms or applause. It is choosing alignment over approval, substance over show, eternity over immediacy. And as you embrace this way of living, you discover a life of freedom, peace, and clarity. A life where your worth is unshakable, your purpose undeniable, and your soul firmly anchored in the unchanging love of God. Your soul is not for sale. It was never meant to be traded for attention, likes, validation, or fleeting recognition. The world may try to convince you otherwise, presenting a constant stream of voices that tell you your worth is conditional, your identity is negotiable, and your life's value depends on how well you perform. But these are lies crafted by fleeting systems, algorithms, and human judgment. Your soul was forged in eternity, shaped by God's hands, and stamped with a value that no one can diminish, no algorithm can quantify, and no public opinion can alter. This is the ultimate truth, and it is non-negotiable. Every day the world tempts you to compromise. The subtle pressure to conform, to curate, to perform for approval creeps in quietly. You may start by adjusting a word, a post, or a behavior here and there, and soon the soul begins to bend. Bit by bit, you trade authenticity for visibility, substance for style, obedience for popularity. It may feel necessary, even harmless at first, but every compromise chips away at the foundation of who you were created to be. And when the soul is gradually sold to the highest bidder of recognition, peace is lost, joy becomes fragile, and freedom disappears. The cost is far too high, and the debt is invisible until you wake up one day and realize that you no longer recognize yourself. Yet there is hope, a way to reclaim what was never meant to be negotiable. God's love is constant, His approval invisible but unshakable, and His truth eternal. When you root your identity in Him, you create a fortress against the seduction of external validation. You no longer live to satisfy the crowd because you have been satisfied by the Creator. You no longer chase applause because you already carry the approval that matters most. Your worth is not a product to be promoted, a performance to be perfected, or a trend to be followed. It is sacred, eternal, and priceless. Choosing not to sell your soul requires vigilance, courage, and discernment. It means noticing when the world tempts you to measure yourself by metrics, influence, or visibility. It means pausing before you adjust your behavior to gain approval. It means questioning whether your actions are motivated by authenticity or by the desire to be seen. And it means returning, consistently and deliberately, to the truth that your life is a reflection of God's design, not human judgment. This daily practice protects your soul from subtle compromises that accumulate over time. There is power in this refusal. When you stop trading your soul for validation, you gain clarity, freedom, and peace. You can walk through life without the constant pressure to perform, compare, or impress. You can speak, act, and love from a place of truth rather than strategy. You can engage the world without being enslaved by its fleeting measures. And in this place, your life becomes a testimony, not of what others saw, but of what God sees, an unshakable reflection of eternal love, purpose, and identity. Your soul is priceless, and God calls you to guard it with vigilance. It cannot be sold, diminished, or diminished by anyone else. Every time you resist the temptation to perform for approval, you honor the Creator who made you complete, whole, and enough. Every time you choose obedience over applause, authenticity over appearance, and truth over trend, you reclaim a piece of eternity that the world can never touch. Living this way is not passive. It is a radical act of faith. It is a daily declaration that you will not let fleeting recognition define your eternal identity. So remember, your soul is not for sale. It is your sacred treasure, entrusted to you by God. Protect it fiercely, nourish it faithfully, and live in a way that reflects its divine worth. When the world demands performance, you respond with presence. When society pressures you for approval, you answer with obedience. When comparisons tempt you to despair, you stand firm in the truth of God's eternal affirmation. The world may try to buy your attention, but your soul remains priceless. You were chosen, beloved, and defined by the one who holds eternity in his hands. No algorithm, no applause, and no human judgment can ever change that.